The history of the world is none other than the progress of the consciousness of freedom. Hegel. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Goethe. Freedom is a value held dear by people throughout history, across all cultures. Governments of all varieties promise it to their citizens, regardless of the actual policies they support. Men have died by the millions believing that they were struggling for it. In nations around the world, great and small, flags are lifted and voices raised in tribute to it. Freedom has been described as the universal desire of the human spirit. But if freedom is so dear to the mind of man, we must expect that those among us who wish to dominate others for their own ends will be well aware of this. Rhetoric promising freedom and our almost instinctive tendency to respond to it have always been a powerful tool used by tyrants and despots. Stalin, Hitler, and Mao spoke of freedom. In fact, even the gates of Auschwitz promised it, proclaiming work makes freedom. It is this aspect of the issue which the following discussion will focus on. Drawing on diverse influences including the ancient Greek thinkers Heraclitus and Socrates, 19th century philosopher G.W.F. Hegel popularized his concept of dialectics, which held that ideas and phenomena are inherently bound up with their opposites in such a way that the resolution of contradictions leads to continual qualitative progression. One of the dialectics which Hegel chose to place significant emphasis on was the master-slave relationship, which he saw as a significant challenge to the advancement of freedom. Had Hegel lived another 40 years, we can presume he would have been pleased to see the end of chattel slavery in America, the largest remaining slave-holding nation in the world at that time. It is not likely, however, that Hegel would have considered this the end of the master-slave dialectic's relevance. In fact, Hegel's most famous student, Karl Marx, would go on to develop a broad philosophical and political framework based largely on the idea that the great majority of men were exploited by the rich capitalist class, which he saw as the new slave masters. For Marx, history was a long, gradual climb up from explicitly slave-based societies and their feudal offspring, through capitalism, to socialism, and ultimately to a classless society in which all forms of exploitation from the grossest chattel slavery to the subtlest private property would be abolished. While few modern philosophers would agree with Marx's more extreme prescriptions such as the abolition of all private property, there is a general sense in intellectual circles that much of his social criticism remains valid. In that spirit, this essay will attempt to argue that in the contemporary culture of capitalism, the master-slave dialectic remains discernible. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. George Orwell. The idea that people should work for a living is very nearly universal in its acceptance. We grow up with this idea, seeing it reinforced in our homes, churches, media, and peer groups from a very early age. The belief that decent people are to have jobs or own businesses is almost sacrosanct. It is rarely questioned, and when it is, the questioners are usually censured or ostracized in various ways. It is clear that as a society, we are convinced of the merit in the message on the gates of Auschwitz, but it is not so clear why this should be so. The most common answer, that people need to earn a living, is obviously tautologous. It is simply an undisguised value judgment which does not even attempt to address the issue of why people need to earn a living in a world of increasing material abundance. Despite its total philosophical vacuity, the ubiquitous statement is usually delivered with a granite-like sense of finality, as if it were the sort of truth that is simply unimpeachable, to be challenged only by fools and madmen. But why should people need to earn a living? Arguments in favor of work's value usually boil down to the question of obligation. We are to work because the world does not owe us a living. But why doesn't it? After all, we did not choose to be born. To say that we have any obligation in a transaction we did not choose smacks of coercion and even enslavement, but those who point out the fact that no one chooses to be born are customarily dismissed as childish, unrealistic, etc. And yet, If I were to give you a candy bar which you never asked for and wait until after you had eaten part of it to inform you that I expected payment, how would you think of me? Pointing to the inherent unfairness of imposing a sense of obligation on individuals for taking part in a life they never chose is not a denial of life's value, as some may suppose. The aim is not to complain about being alive, but to question the assumption that life is something we have to earn. It is common to hear life described as a gift, but what kind of gift comes with an obligation? If supporters of the capitalist work ethic were consistent, they would describe life as a sale. We are sold the right to live in exchange for a lifetime of labor. There is clearly no gift element to be found in this, at least not once we leave the shelter of childhood and enter the adult world, where we are expected to begin discharging our debt to the world, and insisting that those who question this need to grow up simply dodges the whole issue. A better argument in favor of work centers around the actual benefits we are provided as members of a civilized society. In developed nations, most of us have access to clean water, safe food supplies, public roads, free primary education, etc. Perhaps it is fair to suggest that we have some obligation in reciprocating for these provisions and privileges. And yet, it remains hard to see how this translates to a requirement of gainful employment. There are any number of alternative ways to contribute to one's society. By writing this essay, I am humbly attempting to pursue one such method of contribution, for which I expect to be paid nothing, and for which I would contend there is no tangible economic value. Most of us engage in much more significant non-economic tasks each day: child rearing, community participation, self-improvement, etc. These activities constitute a great deal of our individual contribution to the world, and yet, they carry little weight in the public eye if we aren't willing to participate economically. In capitalism, the economy always comes first.